I want to explain the process why most gardeners have a hard time growing vegetables or any other plants. Concept is called soil skinning. And soil skinning is very different than what you might think. What it is the separation of the consistency of your soil, meaning the three parts are separating themselves, the humus-rich part, the sand part, and the clay part. So these three components are in this position. So here's the top of your soil, and here's all these different materials mixed together. And what happens is you take your garden hose and you water, and all the clay particles remain on the top. So they're the ones that don't get washed down because they're heavier. So the humus, the sand, everything gets washed down, and you have this layer on top of mainly clay. So this clay has the issue that they get bound together when the sun shines on them. So when the sun shines on these particles, they actually get fused together, especially if there's moisture available. So what happens is you get this clay layer on top, and this clay turns into a skin that is impenetrable for water and impenetrable for air, oxygen, to get down into the micronutrients and the root system. So this entrance of oxygen into the soil is crucial for plant life and for success in gardening. So by having this layer blocking the entrance of water and air and everything else needed for the root systems and the microorganisms that live inside here, you're in a lot of trouble. That's the problem with that, because they're not getting the oxygen they need. Okay, so how do you avoid this mess? The one way is never allow the sun to touch your soil, number one. Number two is to have a layer of mulch and other things on top of your soil so the sun can't get at it. And when you water, you're watering the mulch first. You're not watering the soil first. So you're watering the mulch first, and the mulch takes away the mechanical activity, the mechanical strength of the garden hose or whatever your irrigation might be. So what happens is you're watering the mulch, the leaves, or whatever you have on top first. So the mulch is taking away the mechanical energy of the water from moving lighter particles to lower levels. So you're not ending up with a layer of clay on top, because the watering system is actually not mechanically separating these particles as much as if the mulch wasn't there. So having the mulch on top helps a lot with this material not being separated from each other. So that's a good visual of how this watering and sun create this skinning on top of your topsoil. Here's a real good example of what I'm talking about with this soil compaction. So we have 3 inches of chewed up leaves and branches and everything on top of this bed. And when we water this bed, what happens is the water hits these leaves and branches first, and then trickles down at a slower pace into the plant material. So the soil skinning here doesn't take place. We've also planted these coals really close together, and their leaves are going to cover the ground completely very soon. This is about 2 weeks in, and by doing that, we will protect our soil from the sun. So this is a good hands-on way of how we've done it, protecting our soil from skinning over. Yeah, I want to talk about soil skinning or soil scorching. I've heard very little discussion about this topic, but what happens in Ecuador here with this equatorial sun, we get this skin on top of our garden beds, and it can become rock hard. and it makes it very hard for you to start seedlings. It makes it hard for you to have the root system go into the next layer because it's so crusty and so hard. The mistake most gardeners make is that soil makeup that they've created isn't organic enough. What I mean by that, it doesn't have enough fluffy material like humus or pine needles or whatever it may be to make it less clay-like, less hard-packed soil. So you need to break up that ability of the soil to turn into hard-packed clay. And the sun has this magical ability to aid in the process of making your soils rock hard. So I always preach about having your soil covered at all times. If your soil is covered at all times, the sun doesn't have the ability to activate the clay particles in your soil to make it into a hard packed material. So you're protecting your soil from baking, you're protecting your soil from creating these nasty layers of impenetrable soil molecules. So if you can avoid the sun touching your soil, if you can make your soil fluffy as you possibly can, adding humus, adding peat moss, adding pine needles, whatever it may be, rotten leaves. If you can get your soil to be very fluffy and manageable with your hands, so the hand test is always good, where you reach into your soil and you work through it, and it actually has no ability to compact to make a ball. You can't make a ball out of your soil. It just falls apart. In that moment, you've done a really good job with your soil consistency. Now I want to go after the no-till farmers a little bit, or the no-till gardeners. They claim that they just keep putting new layers on top, new layers on top, new layers on top. You have to have really damn good soil to be able to do that, because these compaction layers of just people walking on top of it, compaction layers of the sun burning out your soil, really do make your soil layered and with different consistencies. All of us have taken a pitchfork, stuck it into the ground, turned it over, and we realize that the soil is a parcel. It's stuck together. It's like clay. It's like a chunk of something. And we have to take the shovel or pitchfork and smash it and break it up again. That is what I'm talking about, this soil compaction, this burning of the soil, this layering that happens. And that layering is a big reason why a lot of gardens aren't successful. And what happens is the root systems, they start to grow, they hit a different layer, then they hit another different layer, then they hit another different layer. And what happens is they don't have this ease of going from top to bottom to reach water. They have a spurt of growth, hit something hard. Another spurt of growth, go through some soft layers. Another spurt, hit something hard again, hit something soft again. So they have this growing process that is stunted, and again, when they hit a soft layer, it speeds up again. So if your soil is consistent all the way through, the sun doesn't burn the top out of it, it doesn't skin your soil, your roots will have a much easier way of getting through to the bottom. There's always this issue that you have to sort of understand your soil. You know, a lot of soil scientists talk about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, meaning 1/3 organic matter, 1/3 compost, and 1/3 clay. And if you have that all mixed together perfectly, your soil is very fluffy, very organic, everything can grow through it, then you're doing a good job. But what a lot of people don't understand is that the sun is beating down on this planter, and it will do a job of activating the clay particles remain on the top. It's not an it's a mechanical effort. What happens is you're watering, of course you're pushing all the softer materials through, and the hard packed clay remains on the top. So that watering is a huge problem in that issue. Now the sun comes and has the ability to touch the topsoil. It has the ability to bake the clay particles that are on top of your bed, and those particles will actually be very hard. They can actually get so hard that the pitchfork won't even enter. So it's up to the gardener to understand how to keep the top layer protected, how to keep the top layer very fluffy, and how to not use water when you're watering to bring all the clay particles to the top. So it's a big issue on the gardener himself or herself to understand that these hard packed soils are probably one of the biggest reasons your vegetables aren't growing very well. And I don't think this issue with the soil skinning is talked about enough. So those three components mix thoroughly so the molecules are nice and separate from each other, but yet combined. So the sand molecule is touching the humus, touching the clay, and it's not just clay touching each other. So what happens is the watering mechanism is the most dangerous to re-separate those materials again. And what happens is so you water and the clay is heavier, so it's going to stay on top and all the other materials are washed through. So you have a higher consistency of clay particles on the very top layer, and the sun has the ability to bake that clay, to make it hard, to make the clay molecules join each other, to make a skin. That's the biggest problem in gardening, is when you have your soil skinning. Probably the biggest reason why a lot of people can't grow really great vegetables, because their soil consistency isn't fluffy enough. When it comes to soil skinning, we need to talk about aeration. So when you have a layer of something hard, impenetrable, it affects how the air reaches the aerobic structures in your soil, the aerobic living creatures that are in your soil. If they don't receive enough air, they're not going to function the way they should. So it's really important to also understand that soil skinning has a huge effect on activity that's taking place inside your soil. So it's really important to have your soil allow the air get deeper into the soil. The deeper the air gets into the soil, the better the roots are going to be, the better the microorganisms are going to be functioning. Everything is going to work a lot better if there's air entering into the structure of the soil. That's a very, very important point.